In this video I will show you how to create 3 fun farm-themed cards using one stencil in different ways. I will show you how to build up your stencil in layers and how to combine multiple colors for a playful effect. You will see how I create 3 different backgrounds, each with its own look and technique. From a soft embossed panel with a sweet sheep, to a fresh blue and green design with a cow, and a layered background with dice and a cloud stencil. All the animals are stamped and I will show you exactly how I color them step by step. So stay with me and let's create something fun together. Enjoy watching! Hello, it's CisVolk. Time to enjoy card making with me. For this first card I combined a stencil with a large cow head and some text. Because I want the text to look like a banner with the cow's head popping out above it, the text needs to be stamped first. These are fun Dutch sentiments that match the animals perfectly, and I will also stamp a matching sentiment inside the card later on. To stamp nice and straight with a clear block, place the stamps along the lines of your work mat. You can also use grid paper if you don't have a work mat. All my stamping is done with VersaFine ink because it gives a crisp, deep black impression. Place your watercolor paper straight along the lines of the mat and use the lines on the clear block to guide your stamping. Stamp the text near the bottom of the card, but leave a bit of space underneath. Press the stamp down firmly. This ink stays wet for a little while, which makes it perfect for heat embossing. Sprinkle clear embossing powder over the stamped image. The powder sticks to the ink, and when heated with a heat tool, it melts into a beautiful glossy raised finish. I will show this once in real time, but I won't repeat it for every image, since this video is really about working with the stencil. Now for the stencil, place it playfully on a diagonal. Secure it with 2 magnets. Use a piece of masking tape to cover the text. That way the stencil pattern won't cover the text and it creates that banner effect. Use the grid lines on the work mat again to keep everything straight. If the tape sits at the same height on both sides, you know it's aligned properly. I chose Distress Oxide in the color Rustic Wilderness. Because this stencil has small openings, a blending brush works best. Pick up some ink with the brush and tap off the excess on your work surface. Then apply the ink with soft circular motions. Focus the color mainly in the center and leave the edges white. This is the first layer. Then I clean the stencil and dry it well. I turn the stencil around and place the diagonal lines right on top of the diagonal lines from the previous layer. This way you immediately find the right position for the next color. If everything lines up correctly, the larger open squares will now fall onto the white areas of the paper. I place the masking tape back in exactly the same spot before adding color. I chose Distress Oxide in the color Chipped Sapphire, because it pairs beautifully with the green and fits the farm theme so well. In Dutch we even say blauw en groen is boerenfatsoen, which more or less means blue and green should never be seen. But I really like this color combination and I love that the word boeren connects to the farm theme. I continue blending the ink onto the paper. Using soft circular motions I still keep the edges white. That way you create a natural frame without needing extra layers or masking. I also want to add a strip of the stencil pattern underneath the text, so I move the stencil slightly down, making sure the pattern still lines up nicely. A magnetic ruler really helps to keep everything straight while placing the masking tape. Because I align the ruler with my work mat, I can clearly see if everything is straight. I place the masking tape right against the ruler and once it is secured with a magnet, the ruler can be removed again. Here I blend a small strip with the blue ink, just lightly, because the edges stay soft and it is only a small area. The green layer needs one more pass, so I clean and dry the stencil again. Now we can already see where the masking tape needs to go, so I place that first. Then I position the stencil on top again. Look for the point where the diagonal lines overlap the previous pattern and make sure that thin lines run in the opposite direction, so a grid pattern appears and the open areas fall onto the white paper. If it does not line up straight away, just turn the stencil around. You will find the right position. Take a moment to check the alignment carefully before fixing it down, because if it shifts, the result will not look as neat. At this point I already have enough ink left on my work mat and I notice that a lighter layer actually blends more beautifully, especially for a background like this. There's a tiny mistake where the stencil shifted a little, but I can easily cover that later with part of the cow. Watch how the cow is stamped and colored, and then we move on to the next card, where I will share a few really helpful tips with you. As you see, you can stamp the flower exactly how you like, and you can stamp the hooves separately. For coloring I use the same green and blue as in the background, and I also add black, brown and the soft pink. This way everything comes together nicely and the colors are balanced throughout the card. For the next card I will use the sheep's head and again the same kitchen towel stencil, both from the On the Farm collection from Carla Creates by Vaessen Creative. I will show you how to create these two backgrounds. This one is made using 2 ink colors and the other one uses 3 colors. I have even added an extra technique, so you also get some texture and dimension. Just watch along. For this background I will use tattered rose, a crackling campfire and aged mahogany. I start with tattered rose, the lightest color. This will be the soft base layer on the paper. Again I use smooth white watercolor paper. Blend very lightly and as evenly as possible, until the whole background has a smooth and even layer of color. Then I clean my work surface and place the stencil on the paper. I turn both the stencil and the paper over so I can secure it from the back with tape. This way it stays nicely in place and I can check if everything is straight by aligning the top and bottom edges of the paper with the stencil and making sure the pattern overlaps evenly on both sides. Now I move on to the second color, crackling campfire. I blend this color over the entire background. That's also why I use tape, so I don't have magnets in the middle of my paper while blending. It often feels like a waste to clean a stencil that still has a lot of ink on it, so instead you can use it again in a different way. If you lightly spray a piece of watercolor paper with water and gently dab off the excess, you can use the stencil to transfer the remaining ink with an embossing technique. Place a rubber mat in your die cutting machine, add the damp watercolor paper on top and then place the inked stencil on top of that, with the ink facing the paper. Lay it down carefully without moving it, otherwise the ink will already transfer. Then run it through the machine, with the correct plates for embossing. The result is beautiful. The stencil pattern is pressed into the paper, and at the same time the ink transfers onto the surface. Where there was no stencil, the paper becomes embossed. It gives such a fun and unique effect. Make sure to clean your rubber mat and your plates very well afterwards, because you worked with ink and you don't want that transferring to your next project. On this embossed panel I will add one more color. First I add some tape to the back of the panel so the stencil stays in place again. I want to keep the white openings clean and the diagonal lines need to point in the same direction as the pattern underneath. That means all the white areas will now be colored with aged mahogany. I only have 3 large blending brushes, so I quickly clean the orange one before using it again. Because the colors are quite close in tone, that works perfectly fine. With very different colors I would not do that so quickly. When I remove the stencil, it almost looks like you first applied one solid color and then blended a second color over it. But because of the texture and the slightly uneven application, it creates a beautiful plate effect. Now I go back to my first panel. Place the stencil with the openings on the blocks first, and then shift it one block to the left. Check carefully that the thin diagonal lines go in the opposite direction, so they would from a grid if they overlapped. Now the diagonal lines of the stencil sit on the solid areas of the paper underneath. No line pattern is placed on top of another line pattern. Blend the entire panel again. This gives such a warm effect, just like a cozy plate or a traditional kitchen towel. Here you can see both panels next to each other. On the left the panel I embossed with the stencil, and on the right the panel where I first added a base color and then layered the stencil twice with 2 different colors. By turning the stencil and using colors that work well together, you can create such a fun and interesting pattern. I will first quickly show you how I color the sheep. and how beautifully it matches the stencil background simply by using the same ink colors. After that, you will see how to make and color a matching embossed panel so it coordinates perfectly with the sheep and the stencil background. Enjoy watching the coloring process! As you can see, it looks a bit plain to place the sheep like this on the background pattern without anything else. It really needs something extra. Both backgrounds are perfectly usable because the same colors were used to color the sheep as for blending the stencil. Just like earlier in the video with the pig and the handkerchief stencil, you could place the stencil diagonally on the card, add the sheep with the legs on top and trim away the rest of the paper. But this time I came up with something a little different. Before I show you that, I will first add some highlights to the colored sheep with a white gel pen. Because yes, I forgot that again for a moment. I moisten a piece of A6 smooth white watercolor paper by Florence with a spray bottle. I do this on both sides and then I emboss the paper in the die cutting machine. For this I use the wood embossing folder from the On the Farm collection. I use the Cut Easy machine by Vaessen Creative in the usual way for embossing. You use the base plate, the embossing folder with the paper inside and one cutting plate on top. This is the standard way to use a 3D embossing folder. This folder creates a deep and very detailed texture, and you can clearly see how beautifully the wood grain is pressed into the paper. I will use this panel on my card in a moment, but first I want to show you another way of embossing, which gives a slightly softer and less deep texture, but is also really beautiful to use. For that technique you need a rubber mat, which you place on your base plate. On top of that comes your slightly damped paper, with the right side facing up. Then place the embossing folder open on top of the paper, so you are only using one side of the folder. On top of that comes the top plate as usual. You might need to add a shim or a piece of cardstock, depending on the pressure of your machine, so always test what works best for you. When you remove the embossing folder, you can immediately see that this also creates a beautiful pattern with a slightly different wood texture. Here you can see both panels side by side, and the difference in texture is very clear. This panel was embossed with the folder open, so the texture is softer and flatter, while this one has much more depth and dimension. Make sure to slightly moisten your paper because dry paper can tear under too much pressure. I really love this wood texture, it even feels nice to the touch. Now I will color this panel using a blending brush and the same distress oxide colors I used for the stencil before. The top part will be colored with aged mahogany and the bottom part with crackling campfire. Blending on textured paper is actually easier with a blending brush because the brush follows the raised pattern nicely. You can also add color before embossing, but the result will look slightly different. After adding the second color, I go back with the first color again to blend the transition more smoothly. To enhance the wood grain even more, I gently drag the ink pad directly over the surface. This really brings out the texture and makes the color stand out even more. I cut the piece to the size I need, and I also trim a strip of about 1 cm to create a board. To make both the embossed panel and the stencil match the stamped sheep with the black lines a bit better, I ink the edges of the paper with a black ink pad. I gently swipe the ink pad along all the edges, including the edges of the narrow strip. For this I use black memento ink, which dries quickly because it is water-based. Be careful with inky fingers and unwanted fingerprints. On a white strip of cardstock I stamped a fun sentiment and heat embossed it. This sentiment is also part of the sheep stamp set. Using double-sided tape I attached the 2 embossed wood strips to the sentiment strip. And then this whole piece can be added to the card. I intentionally cut the stencil panel slightly smaller so that the white border returns in the sentiment strip as well. The sheep is attached with 2 mm foam squares. And I also raise the poles with foam squares, letting them slightly overlap the edge. And this is how the card turned out. It looks so fun and playful like this. Let's move straight on to the final card. For this one we use the cow stamps again for a fun and playful design. I also used the dies from the On the Farm set and 2 different stencils. The kitchen towel stencil is again from the On the Farm collection and the cloud stencil is from an earlier collection, the guinea pigs collection. When I was working on the card with the horse, I thought a soft blue sky with the cloud stencil would be a great addition. But when I tried it, it felt a bit too busy for that design, so I saved the background for another card. Here you can see how I created that sky. First I apply a light layer of blue ink. Here I apply it directly onto a folded card base. On smooth cardstock the blending is not always perfect, but we will add more layers, so that is not a problem. Build up the sky in layers. Each time apply a small amount of ink along the edge of the stencil and softly blend it outwards from darker to lighter, without touching the previous cloud layer. Turn the stencil to create a new row of clouds. The more layers you add, the busier the sky becomes, but it also creates a beautiful soft sky effect. Try to let the sky take up 1/3 or 2/3 of your card. This creates a nice visual balance. At the bottom, I create the grass using the kitchen towel stencil. I secure it with masking tape right at the edge of the sky. Using Distress Oxide Rustic Wilderness, I blend the grass. Again, I use soft circular motions and I keep the ink light by first removing the excess on my work surface. For a second layer, I go over it once more with the same ink color, but this time I shift the stencil slightly. I move the stencil in a way that the diagonal lines now cross over the previous ones, forming a grid pattern. At the same time, the white squares of the paper remain visible. This creates more green areas and a beautiful layered pattern in between. By shifting your stencil like this, you build up depth and variation, which is exactly what makes layering with stencils so effective. I will finish this card with some stamped and die-cut elements. Feel free to ask any questions you have in the comments below this video, and also take a look at the description. You will find a lot of extra information there that might help you. You will also find links to the products I used in this video. Some of them are affiliate links, which means I receive a small commission while you don't pay anything extra. They only work when you accept cookies, so if you would like to support my channel, that really helps me a lot. Enjoy watching how I finish this card. This is the last finished card. Isn't it fun how the kitchen towel stencil works perfectly as a grass in the background? Just by using one ink color. If you would like to see more about the dies and how to create the windmill, have a look at my previous video. I will link it below and in the top right corner. If you are planning to shop, feel free to use the links and accept cookies. That way you support my channel without any extra cost. This was quite a long video. In the coming weeks I will share some shorter reels for inspiration while I take a short break and work on new ideas behind the scenes. If you are looking for more inspiration, you can also join the Facebook group from Carla Creates. You will find the link in the description, together with links to my other socials like Facebook, Pinterest and Instagram. You can find me there as CisVolk. Enjoy this beautiful hobby, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a comment below. That really helps my channel grow. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye bye!